Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. I'm speaking with Christopher Bendikson. Welcome, Christopher.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So could you give us a brief introduction as to the projects you're involved in at the moment, please, Christopher? And what I'll do is cycle back and work out how you got to today. So just a very brief overview of what you spend your time doing today.
Sure. So I am the Bitcoin research lead at a company called CoinShares. We are the largest digital asset manager in Europe. We have about 6 or 7 billion, depending on the price, under management. We offer a wide range of digital investment products. We offer exchange traded funds. We offer individual trading strategies. We can do brokerage. We can do lending. You know, we're becoming quite a diversified shop. We also have blockchain equity index products. We have a venture portfolio. You know, we're getting there in terms of product diversity and what we're able to offer to our clients. So we're mainly focused on the European market. You know, our direct sort of competitors on the US side would be Grayscale. You know, we have some competitors here in Europe too, but they're all significantly smaller than us. So that's basically the company, and within the company, so for about 5 years or so, I was the head of research. So I led the entire research operation. I've recently taken a bit of a step back. We're doing a lot of altcoin stuff these days, and I'm not really interested in that, nor do I really want to put my name behind anything that has to do with any of that. So I've kind of taken a step back and sort of been able to build my own little Bitcoin research desk where it's just 2 of us right now, but we're you know, in my own humble view, we're a quality shop. So we focus on everything Bitcoin. We do a lot of fundamentals research. We do valuation research. We've done quite a lot on the mining network. We've mapped out the location of it, the power draw. We've done a bunch of ESG stuff related to Bitcoin mining. And you know, we also have a bit of a focus on the human rights angle of things. This is also part of the sort of ESG push. We find that the narrative that's being put out there with regards to Bitcoin and ESG is just severely lacking. It's very, very asymmetrical and one-sided, and it only takes into account like the very small amount of whatever negative you can find, and forgets about all the positives. So basically, a very targeted kind of Bitcoin research operation, with some interesting kind of niches that we've, you know, come to delve deeper into than others, just because it's hard to explain why it became like that, but that's basically it. Run a Bitcoin research desk. Awesome. An asset manager, doing it for a while.
If you don't know a question I have in regards to Bitcoin, then no one will. I think it's probably my summary of that introduction in a sense. Like, as the head of research in this space for a period of time, like you mentioned, like there's not many people that would have had that exposure.
Yeah, no, that's probably true, but you know, you got to keep in mind that the rabbit hole is endless, and there is no bottom, and there's always more to learn. And even, I mean, you can even make an argument that Satoshi probably didn't fully grasp or understand everything about Bitcoin, because there's so much to it that it's like we've been dropped this like alien technology in our laps, and we're just a bunch of monkeys like trying to figure out what this even is. And so I can assure you that there are questions you can put to me that I can't answer. But it's never happened in client meetings, so that's good. But I think that probably says more about the the where the client where our clients are in their journey towards understanding than it's
maybe.
So
awesome. And I look forward to digging into all of these areas. If we could, can we rewind? So this is where your time and energy is focused today, but that wasn't always the case. So what was life like growing up for you? Were you always interested in technology? Was central banking and the monetary system part of life as a teenager? Like, how did you get to this point? And did you do a finance degree or something? Just talk to me a little bit about the journey.
I've always been interested in technology, and I've been a sort of STEM student for my entire academic career or whatever.
So what does STEM mean, Christopher?
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's just like an acronym.
Yeah.
And no, I don't know that I really thought about central banking at all until like university.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a very kind of remote part of the world. I grew up up in the Arctic Circle in northern Norway.
Wow.
So it's not the most connected places in the world. It's really nice. It's really, really nice. And I appreciate it more and more every time I go back. But yeah, none of these things. I mean, I've always had an interest in economics in general. I just didn't really fully understand what that meant. We had even in high school, we had our like cursory introduction to economics, and a lot of it just never made sense to me. And we had a teacher who was just very upfront about that. And I think that's probably like one part of the journey towards like the orange pill. I guess I was red pilled before I was orange pilled, but part of the journey was just I remember this very key moment where our teacher, and economics wasn't even a separate subject. It was part of like, what do they call it? I don't even remember what they called it, but it was some like societal science or whatever. And he just made the point that, GDP is such like an interesting and weird measure, because going by GDP, you could argue that natural disasters and war and everything is good for the economy, right? If all you're looking for is growth of GDP, you should just burn down all the cities every day and rebuild them, because then magically GDP goes up, right? And I always found, it kind of stuck with me in the back of my head. I was like, okay, so we clearly have issues in like the way that we think about this, but that I didn't really think much further about that until later. Then, next big thing on my like red pill journey was when I was in the military, and I was kind of like a sports guy at that time. I was very serious about playing soccer, and I was pretty decent. Got into the military, was like a bit of a goody two shoes, at least for the start of it. Was always trying to like do my best. Sorry, can we pause for a second? I'm not sure that my sound is coming properly through.
So Michael, we're just talking about playing soccer playing soccer and entering the military, and how you felt at the time.
Yeah, so when I entered the military, I was a bit of like a goody two shoes, and always wanted to like perform well and, do as you're told and, follow orders. And there was this whole, I guess, this like underlying idea in my head that, I was performing like a service, and there was like a level of implicit gratitude from, the other end, whatever that was, an abstract idea that somehow like the superiors or whatnot like had my back, and yeah, would kind of like reciprocate, if you will, like all the things that we did as like the grunt guys. And then I had an experience where we were going to this like major exercise, and I fell down with probably like the flu. And it happened immediately as we were like driving down in a convoy for like 800 kilometers or something, like very, very slowly. And I just had to sit there and suffer. Like nobody even gave enough of a shit to like manage to pass me some like painkillers. And I was like, at the end of it, I was just literally like flat down in like the back of like a shitty old like military vehicle, and then ended up being hospitalized like once we actually like made it 2 days later to where we were going. And I just remember feeling completely like, oh my God, like nobody cares. Like no one gives a shit. Like you're just some number. They don't care if you live or die. Like all the things that you think you're doing is just bullshit. Like the state does not give a fuck about you, right?
Yeah.
And that started like changing something, I think, internally, where I just became a lot more cynical with regards to the relationship between the individual and the state. Not something that I could like articulate very well at the time, but you get that feeling where just like, okay, well, actually, I'm on my own. The state doesn't care. They're just, you're just some like cash cow for them. Here I am, having worked for free for like an entire year of my life, fulfilling their goals, whatever those are. And in return, like, they almost killed me without like not even caring. So, or at least it felt like that. I don't know that I was ever like,
It's your personal experience. That's the point. I mean, it's not meant to be a certain way. It's just your expectations
right,
versus your perceptions, and then your reality that's what resulted, right? You came out of that and you were thinking about the relationship between the state and the individual, which perhaps wouldn't have happened had that experience not been the case.
exactly. And it is definitely the most that I've ever like suffered in terms of pain and just feeling of hopelessness. So that was probably like a key moment towards getting red pilled. So after that, I did a year of university. I studied psychology and chemistry and physics in Norway, and then decided that I wanted to move to the US. So I did all the things and got my SATs and my whatever they're all called, those like weird tests that they do to like determine whether or not you can, I guess, like read and do math. I got into a school in Florida and moved down there to study chemistry.
Christopher, if I may, if I could jump in then. So I've never spoken to someone from the Arctic Circle before. I'd love to learn a bit more about like what was life like growing up there, and I guess what was normal until perhaps when you went to university was probably in Oslo or something, but then moving to the States or something in Florida. I mean, wow, you've gone from the Arctic Circle to the Caribbean pretty much. Big change. Right. So just explain to me a bit what that was like. I mean, how did you feel about the whole process?
The whole process. Well, I mean, so it's you know, where I grew up doesn't have like a proper university,
Mhm.
so it's completely expected that, you know, once you finish high school, you move. I mean,
Okay.
also, you know, if you're a guy, there's a high chance you're getting called into the military anyway. Well, now actually it's both. You know, there's a decent chance you get called in if you're just healthy and, you know, not mentally inept in any way. Well, basically the military can call in whoever they want to
Mhm.
fill their numbers. So it's and that's, you know, you're not going to get stationed in your hometown, probably. It's rare. So it's it's expected that you go somewhere to like get your education. I mean, in terms of like growing up there, it's like, I don't know what it's like to grow up anywhere else. So I don't have anything to compare it to. It's just felt, I guess, like normal, like small town life. Um,
I'm just intrigued on like silly things like, you know, the summer's 2 months long or something, and the winter's like 10 months. And like, so, I mean, during the middle of winter, how much sunlight do you get per day? I mean,
right.
obviously it's normal. I mean, I grew up in the UK, and we get, you know, in the winter, it would be still dark at like 8:30 in the morning. And then by 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's dark again. And I was
Sure.
completely used to that. My wife's Australian. I'm now based in Oz. I lived in
Yeah.
Asia and Singapore for some time, and they don't have any time clock change. And
Yeah.
suddenly realized like, wow, it'd be so different. And I remember sitting in class and it's dark outside at 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. You're like back in a classroom, like it's pitch black outside. Like, what's going on? But it's normal,
Yeah.
so you don't really think any differently.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, the way that the sort of seasons proceed up there is just, again, that I, you know, for a while I thought that's what it was like everywhere. You know, until you're like, you know, 7 or 8 or whatnot, and you
Mm,
learn that, oh no, actually, like, it's totally different other places. They just have like a day and a night that's the same length
mm.
every day of the year. And I was like, huh, fascinating. But yeah, no, up where I'm from, it's um yeah, it's a pretty short summer, to the degree that you can even say that it's like summer. I mean, if you get like 10 days where you can wear shorts like in the summer, it's like pretty normal.
Wow.
It happens that the temperature goes into the 80s, but you know, it's not every year, right?
Mm.
So, and then in
But
terms
it's
of like,
beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
it is amazing. Like, you know, for anyone who hasn't seen the Northern Lights, you know, you're missing out. It's
Really, wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to see. And again, like, it was just there all the time. I thought, you know, everybody knows what that looks like, but
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
you know, nobody does. Like, nobody's ever seen it. But yeah, no,
I'm imagining your house is like one of those kind of cool ice hotels that you see with like the Northern Lights in the background.
right, right, and like bunch of reindeer grazing
Yeah,
in the
everyone's like that there. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
How cool.
we do have moose in our garden from time to time. So,
Awesome.
but
And okay, so you're in a town that was fairly remote. I mean, it could be anywhere in the world, frankly, but the expectation is actually you're going to leave. So you grow up, you get educated, and you head off for further education, and suddenly you
mhm,
find yourself in Florida. Was that a
mhm.
big culture change? And how was life there? You were just about to start explaining that to me before I rewound a bit.
Yeah, no, it's big culture shock in a lot of ways. I mean, no, not in like every way, because like American culture is so kind of well disseminated through popular culture that, you know, you kind of have a lot of expectations of what it's going to be like. And it wasn't very, it was actually remarkably close to what I expected.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you know, you find yourself in this like completely different way of thinking and approaching everything. And you know, that was weird and interesting, but I had an amazing time there. Like, Florida was perfect. You know, I get very weather sick. So if, you know, if it's cold and like depressing and rainy, and you know, the type of weather where you don't want to be outside, like, I kind of become a bit of like an Eeyore. And if it's like really sunny and nice and awesome, like I want to be outside. And if I can't be outside, I get angry.
Mm.
Um, so what I realized when I studied in Norway, and I didn't study in Oslo, I studied in a town called Trondheim, which is a very, very old city. It's over 1,000 years old. Um, and it's like kind of the middle of the country. So, you get like proper winter, but you get like a little bit more of a summer, but not a proper summer. But what I realized was that like as soon as exam time hits, that's like right when summer is happening.
Mm.
And if I have to sit inside and study during all those nice days, and then exams are done, and then I have to go do my summer job, which is going to be inside somewhere, I'm just going to like hate my life.
Mm.
So I decided I needed to get somewhere warm where every day is nice. And if you can't be outside today, that's fine. You can be outside tomorrow because tomorrow is going to be nice, guaranteed.
Mm.
You don't even have to think about it. You get up in the morning, you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops,
Mm.
right? You don't have to layer up and like shovel your car out of like a giant pile of snow and like heat it up for 5 minutes while you eat your breakfast so that it's bearable to sit in it when you're like driving to wherever it is that you're going.
Yeah, it must be tough.
Yeah, it's just not, it's the little things that like make your life more annoying than you want it to.
Mm. But then it's also perspective, isn't it? When you get to a new place, you realize that other people do live differently to how you were born into life per se. And it's not the way of life you were introduced to initially is wrong, bad, or whatever. The point is you have the ability to live in other parts of the world. And, that can be a very rewarding process.
Exactly. And, I always wanted to like get out of like small town life, and kind of move to like a bit more of a city. And so I moved to Tampa, which isn't a big city by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a lot more of a city than I'm used to. And it had all the things that I needed. And the beach was close by, it was always really nice. It's just, yeah, it's pretty much like the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
So you're living like a tropical life, which is much better. And I went to a pretty small private school with tiny classes and lots of like student teacher interaction. Like you could always go knock on the office of your teacher. Like first of all, you were actually taught by a professor. You weren't taught by like a teaching assistant or like a graduate student or anything like that. You were actually taught by like a person with a PhD and years of teaching experience. And you could always go knock on their door, like if you're wondering anything and you had like questions that you wanted answered. So I had a really, really great time. Like we had a pool on campus and it was totally, nobody would bat an eye if you showed up to class in swimwear. So that was just really, really nice, like laid back attitude combined with like high availability of teachers and mentors. It was just really nice. So while I was there, I started getting introduced a lot more to political ideology, as tends to happen when people go to university, right? And the university there was not very like, I could definitely not like pick whether it was like left leaning or right leaning or whatever. It seemed pretty balanced. There were a lot of teachers who were at that time, I would say that I was a bit like undecided. Like I tended to flip to either side depending on sort of like the narrow goals that I thought I wanted to achieve. Like with politics, I hadn't really thought about like like a moral fundament or anything to put things on. Like I I didn't have like a bottom up way of determining like where I stood politically. I just looked at goals kind of narrowly and clinged on to whatever political solution that seemed, you know, with a TM behind it, like it would achieve that, you know, without much like real analysis of would it actually achieve that. You know, it just sounds like it would achieve that, right? And so, but as I got like more and more involved in that, you know, there were I happened to hit the first like the first election where Obama was elected, and kind of got to taste the sort of it, you know, if you think about it, that was quite of like a watershed moment in US politics. And I got to actually experience like a US election cycle from the ground instead of through, you know, the Norwegian news, which I've come to understand in hindsight are like hopelessly terrible at describing all these things. And they think they're not. They think they're like really good, but they're not. They have no idea.
Well, they have an agenda that they must keep to, and therefore they don't tell the
Probably.
story perhaps as you like. Yeah.
Probably. And like all their experts are these like Norwegian professors who are like a professor of like American studies at the University of Oslo. And I'm like, okay, but you know, have you ever
Been to
lived in the
America.
US? You know, like, do you know any Americans? And because it's clear that you don't. But so I got that process kind of you know, close on the body, if you will. And I started getting introduced to a lot more of like the political candidates, and the spectrum of candidates in the US, and I got more familiar with the sort of well, the specter of difference in opinion there, which I found at first to be like crazily to the right in terms of what I was used to, because Norway is very left shifted. You know, even our most conservative parties are probably, well, the Democrats in the US have gotten, you know, a lot more leftist over the last like 8 or so years. But by the time when I was there, you know, which is now like 12-15 years ago, the Democrats were probably as far right as the furthest far right party in Norway. And then the Republicans were like way to the right of that again, and that was like a bit shocking to me. And then what happened was that I got introduced to libertarianism and Ron Paul in particular. And Ron Paul is like definitely the guy who like red pilled me. He just had a way of explaining things, explaining even like economical concepts in a way that just made common sense. And I was like, how come this guy's making sense? And like all these other people are using all this like intricate like language and, you know, weird math that to me as like a student of like math and physics, I'm like, and chemistry, like they use a lot of like terms like equilibrium that are completely inappropriate and out of place and don't have anything to do realistically with like what they're trying to like hang it on, if you will. And I'm like, how come this guy's making so much sense, whereas these guys who are seemingly trying so hard to like science-fy, if you will, their like version of economics just make absolutely no sense when they're talking, and their concepts like don't stand up to scrutiny. And so he's definitely the guy who got me introduced to like the problems of central banking, because he has talked for decades literally about the problem of the Fed, the problem of inflation, how manipulation of interest rates is actually what creates the credit cycle. And lo and behold, right after or during the late election cycle, we get the financial crisis, right? The great financial crisis. And I was there for it, and I got to observe it like close hand. And it's a crazy thing to see when, from like one half of the year to another, every single house in all the neighborhoods that I would drive past to get to school are all for sale. Like, what the hell? Like, how come they're all for sale at the same time? And this whole recession, it just got me like thinking so much. I was like, how come we're producing less value now than we did a year ago? All our capital is still in place. It's not like any of our factories burned down, or like any of our ships sunk, or our planes fell out of the air, or whatnot. We still have all the same productive capacity. Like, we haven't run out of raw materials. People are unemployed now. Why? Right? Like, why were they employed like a year ago but not now? What is the deal here? And from there on, it kind of snowballed into like a deep interest in what the hell is going on, and all the explanations you kept getting fed, right? It's just like, oh, interest rates are too high, we got to just lower interest rates and stimulate the economy,
Whatever that means.
yeah. And meanwhile, I'm like, but hang on a minute, like, wasn't the whole reason that this all went to shit was that you had pushed the interest rate so low that a lot of people had taken out loans that they couldn't afford if the interest rates like normalized? And what does normalized even mean? Like, don't you set the interest rate? Like, how come, like, what is normal then? You just decide, like, there's no market that sets this price. And how come there's not a market that sets this price? How come the market gets to set every price except the price of money? Like, it just made no sense to me. And so all of this was like kind of percolating in the back of my head, but it wasn't like a main focus. Like, I was still studying science. And so I finished in Tampa, got a degree in biochemistry, with a minor in philosophy and in psychology. And then after that, I actually moved back home for like 6 months, worked in an elementary school, just teaching kids, which was actually really awesome, because they're a lot of fun. And if you're just enthusiastic and knowledgeable and treat them not as like little twerps that don't understand anything, they're actually really, really receptive to everything you say, and they suck up information like you wouldn't even believe is possible. But obviously, like, I wasn't going to stay at home. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And what I ended up doing was applying for basically at this point, my overarching goal, like academically or like career wise or whatnot, like I didn't have like a hard career goal by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to get to the bottom of what consciousness was. That was like the goal. I was like, I need to know, like, what is it? Like, what are we? And so I'd always been interested in everything having to do with the brain. So with like a biochemistry like background, I figured, okay, well, why don't I go and study how the brain works, like specifically, or how like the mechanical parts of the body comes together to like create the phenomenon that define us as like living creatures, consciousness being one of them. And so I got into this master's program in Barcelona at the University of Barcelona, studying biophysics, because I had read the sort of things that were to be covered, and electrochemistry was like a big part of it. And I figured naively that surely consciousness is just another mechanistic phenomenon that is caused by whatever mechanics the brain exhibits. And if I could just study those mechanics at a low enough and intricate level, I'll figure out what consciousness is, right? It seemed reasonable to me. Obviously, it's not reasonable at
There's
all,
nothing like
but
an audacious goal, hey?
I thought it was a good goal.
That's
But
brilliant. I love it. It's I mean, frankly, it's what all these conversations are about. I'm really enjoying learning about how people kind of make decisions in life. And
well, you shouldn't go by my example, and because
no, I'm not suggesting that at all. It's interesting how you piece together the pieces. And I'd be lying if I said I went through university and didn't start asking some questions, but it's not necessarily the predominant kind of goal at the time. You're like, I need to get a job, I need to think about a career, and therefore you're not necessarily scratching that itch per se. But I love the idea of like driving past all those houses and seeing they're all for sale and going, hang on, the fuck happened here? And so I'll be very similar age to yourself. I'm 33 at the moment. The global financial crisis, 08, 09, I was still a student. I remember Obama getting voted in. It was a huge moment. I was probably 19 years old at the time or something. And yeah, there were just big things going on in the world at the time. There was stuff changing in the UK as well. So yeah, okay, so we're looking into consciousness, and you're doing a master's in Barcelona, which is an awesome city. I love visiting there. Where did that take you next?
Yeah, so I moved to Barcelona, lived in the Gothic city, which is, the coolest part of the coolest city in the world. And just really had a good time. And there obviously the program itself had a lot of stuff that we covered. We covered basically like molecular machinery and like the physics of like the topography of cells, as determined by like the actual shape of the molecules that make up the membranes. We studied how cells move, and the motors that propel them inside of the structures that they have. But then my project itself was actually doing some experiments on the transmission velocity of the electrical signals of nerve cells. So basically, I worked with this professor who was very interested in propagation speeds of neurons and how to measure them and to see whether the measurement could actually be explained by mathematical models that like models the ion channels on the surface of the synapses in neurons. So basically what we did was that we built these like little cell networks in petri dishes. And so we ordered like euthanized pregnant rats from some other department that dealt with that. Then we dissected the rat and like got all the little babies out of like the birth canal of the mother, and then we cut them out of their sacks, cut their like undeveloped craniums open, and took out the hippocampal neurons from like the side lobes of their like developing brains. This was like, it felt kind of crazy to like be thrown into this. I'd done some cell culture before in my undergrad, but like this felt like super like interesting and real. And
Wow.
part of what I did was that I developed this way where we used 3D printing to print these microscopic shapes, if you will, that we would kind of direct the neurons to live in. So one of the shapes that was particularly interesting was this like weird squarish C starting here, moving. I guess people won't be able to see this, but picture like a C with very square shapes instead of round, and it's very elongated. And if you hold a small circle, in this case, like the microscopic lens, over the start point of the sea, the end point of the sea, and you would also then be able to see the middle point of the sea in as small of a circle as possible. And then we grew the cells in this sort of shape. Then we basically got the cells to take up this fluorescent molecule that lit up every time there was an action potential in the cell. That is, every time the neuron fires and sends an electrical signal, it also caused this fluorescent molecule to emit light.
Wow.
And then, then we looked at this in a microscope, and then we timed the difference between when it lit up from the one part of the beginning of the sea, then to the middle, then to the end. And from those 3 measurement points, we could measure the propagation speed through this like shape that we made. And then we gave them drugs. So then we put in neurotoxins, like really, really dangerous neurotoxins,
wow.
into the petri dish in very carefully calibrated doses. And those neurotoxins would target specific ion channels on the synapses of these molecules. And then from the amount of blockage each channel would get from these neurotoxins, we could then test whether or not the reduction in propagation speed actually conformed to the mathematical model that we used. I think our model was called the Hodgkins-Huxley model of action potentials, and it actually fit. So that's actually a very long way to say that this is how I got introduced to networks. And this was probably one of the well, it's one of those random things that I studied that I have no idea would become relevant to Bitcoin. But it was actually quite relevant to Bitcoin. And previously I'd studied chemistry and a lot of the concepts that happened there around thermodynamics, which was another random thing that I ended up studying in quite some detail that is very important to Bitcoin, but obviously I had no idea at the time. So then, after I finished this project in Barcelona, having never really, like, for some reason, going through my education, like, I never thought that I would have like an issue finding a job or like making money or whatnot, because like in Norway, that's not normally an issue. If you want to work, you can work, because there are so many people who don't want to work and they just like leech on the state, that there's like never really like a lack of jobs for people who want to work. So it never really crossed my mind that I should like think about this and make sure that I had like marketable skills and all that. But so
that's an interesting trait to growing up in Norway. I'm sure there'll be many people similar to yourself. You weren't fussed about that first job per se. What I'm interested, Chris, I feel like you're heading this way, Christopher, but explain to me why thermodynamics and the story you just mentioned about being a student in Barcelona, at some point Bitcoin became part of the kind of decade after that, I guess.
Right.
How does that all fit into play? Because what really fascinates me is that every Bitcoiner you meet, you can ask them the same 10 questions and you get 10 different answers.
Sure.
And everyone's lens on what this thing is slightly different / completely unique. So please teach me about how these seemingly random experiences blended together to give you such confidence in what's a very nascent technology.
Sure. I mean, this didn't be like, I didn't realize this until like way later, right? But,
yeah. Oh, aha. 5 years later,
exactly.
or 10 years later, or whatever.
Yeah, or as I like studied the concepts of Bitcoin, I was like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Like I know that. But yeah, I mean, studying networks, I mean, it's not like the networks we studied were any in any way like similar to like the topography of Bitcoin, but just getting introduced to like network theory and just the ideas of, everyone knows what the word network means, I guess, or they've heard the word network, but it doesn't, the semantic quality of their understanding of that word might vary quite widely. And if you haven't ever, looked into what that can mean in a stricter form or like a more structured form, then as with a lot of words, it's probably a bit vacuous to you. Like you maybe like picture like a net or like a tube map or something, and you don't actually think about it like in an abstract way that can like really help you understand like why it's helpful or valuable or interesting. And so that was interesting. In terms of thermodynamics, I mean, that's like literally the key of Bitcoin, is that we are using externally sourced entropy to thermodynamically prove the passage of time in a way that is very easily verifiable for anyone. And using that technique, we can actually agree on the time ordering of events, even though we don't have synchronized clocks. And that's like mind-blowing, like proof of work is a decentralized cooperative clock that we all work on together. And we substitute the use of synchronized time networks with the proving the passage of time through proving the expenditure of work. And if you've studied physics, you know that work is force times time. So it's a time expenditure of a certain amount of force. And so if work has been expended, by definition, time must have passed. So if you have one event, a computer science event like a block, and you have another one that has work provably expended in it and has a cryptographic fingerprint of the other block, you can know for a fact that the second one was produced after the first one. And that's kind of all you need to know to be certain that the time ordering of something is unambiguous. Like there's no way you can think that block one came after block two, because block two has a cryptographic fingerprint of block one, and it also has a proof that work was expended since block one was in existence, because the work contains that fingerprint. Like it's a mind-blowing thing. And so Bitcoin is like fundamentally thermodynamically oriented. We are using an external source of information to agree on the ordering of events. And this is a thermodynamic process, right? Like you are, if you know that a number could only exist via the serial repetitive guessing, then you know that the person who has this number must have, statistically, at least as you average it out over many blocks, they must have expended work in finding that number. And if work has been expended, time must have passed, ergo this block comes after the previous one. And just by adding like a simple rule, which is the correct blockchain is the one that has the most accumulated work in all its blocks, you have like an amazingly brilliant, super simple, completely objective way of arriving at decentralized consensus of time ordering. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And so, this like really like having studied thermodynamics, like it just, and physics just helped me intuitively like understand this, although I'll just point out that it took me 5 years of studying Bitcoin before I got that.
Wow.
Which
in itself is proof of work.
Huh?
Which in itself is proof of work.
Yeah. Like understanding the proof of work is a decentralized clock. I didn't get that until 2018.
Yeah, until you've done the work. You're like, okay, now I get it.
Oh, dude, I mean, I remember where I was, when I got it. Like, I remember that.
Well, go on, talk to me about that feeling. So for years you'd been studying and suddenly you just had like a bit of a, fuck, that makes sense. Well, how did that feel?
Well, it happens to me all the time in Bitcoin. It's like you think you know something, and then you have this like epiphany moment where you're like, shit, like I don't know anything. I only think that I know something. And it's funny because it's like there's actually another aha moment that I got randomly from my education, was that when I studied chemistry in high school, in like the first couple of years of chemistry, you're introduced to this idea called a shell model, which is that every atom has these shells, and these shells can hold X amount of electrons, and 8 is like the number that they all want to have in their outer shell, and if they can have 8 in their outer shell, they're super happy, and they become like noble gases, right? And so that's like the model you operate under. Like you draw out like these atoms and you put like X amount of protons in the core, and then you draw out these shells with increasing capacity as you like go out, and you're like, okay, that's how atoms work. Okay, I see how this is. I can work with that. And then you get to university level, and first day the professor goes, okay, so that whole shell model that you've been working on for the last 2 years, that's wrong. That's not true.
Yeah, it happens in lots of subjects, that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like, that's not true at all. That's actually just something that is superficially true and can help you understand the concept, but it's actually not how it works. There are actually these orbitals, and these orbitals are like extremely complicated, like mathematical, geometric, there, some of them are spheres, other of them are, I can't even like describe them. They're like kind of rounded tetrahedrons almost, that like poke out at like 120-degree angles from each other, and it gets really complicated. There's like circles, and so what I've come to kind of appreciate is that you can go through your journey of understanding Bitcoin, adopting these types of helpful models that are kind of correct. It's kind of like Newtonian physics are kind of correct. They're correct, in our normal perception of time and space, and like at the speeds that we operate, which are normally like low inside of our frame of reference, which is the Earth. Like Newtonian physics work really well. Like you can calculate your way, like you can model things, like you can model, you can do, if you're an artillerist or something, you can calculate like your ballistic trajectories and like where something's going to land if you shoot it at this velocity at this angle. All this is very useful. You can do calculations of like how much energy is required to stop a car if it's moving this speed, blah blah blah. It's helpful, but it's not correct technically. Einsteinian physics are much more correct, and even those you can argue whether they are fully correct. And so going through like the journey of understanding Bitcoin, I've found to be kind of like a procession of movement through these types of models that are helpful mental models, but they're not correct necessarily. Like there's actually more to it, or there's another thing below it that actually explains it even better if you look at it in that context. And the way that I looked at proof of work before was definitely just a case of this, right? it wasn't correct, but it was still helpful, and it helped me get, you know, to the level of understanding where I needed to be before I could like actually grasp it on a deeper level. And I suspect that there's actually more to it that I just don't understand yet. And, you know, you just have to be kind of humble about that and realize that, you know, Dunning-Kruger effect is like very much a thing in Bitcoin. Like you will probably get to Mount Stupid very quickly. And then you'll spend years in like what do they call it? It's like the valley of, I don't know, nothing. And then like you'll actually from there on start like climbing yourself up very steadily towards like actual knowledge. But it's such a wide ranging subject that you'll probably never get to the bottom of it. And again, like, you know, we have this protocol and it can probably do a bunch of stuff, and it has a bunch of behavior that at the end of the day, like we don't fully understand even today. Even like the cryptographer guys who like, you know, have probably the highest potential to like fully grasp everything about it, even they don't necessarily like grasp all of the effects that Bitcoin has on, you know, society and crazy things like our energy grids. I mean, there's no way Satoshi like foresaw all of this. Like there's no way he foresaw like the integration of Bitcoin into our energy grids and how it can help us you know, create a much more efficient way of adding, you know, lots of renewables into our grids without making them so expensive that they become unpopular. You know, there's just always more to it. And this was just a perfect example of that. It's like you think you know something. At that point, I had started working for CoinShares. I was working as head of research, and you know, you get that moment and you're just like, oh my God, like what else don't I know? Like, do I need to be careful? Like, should I
You're
even
the head
be
of
doing
research, right? It's like if anyone knows, you know, don't you?
right. And you know, fortunately, having the sort of privilege to be in a role like this where you can spend literally all your days doing what you would do anyway, which is like just read about this. It does allow you to pretty much in every case to be ahead of your clients at least, right? So I always feel way behind, you know, the people that have been in this the longest, and like the core devs who like, you know, think about this in ways that I can't, you know, from like a deep understanding of cryptography and computer science, which is where like I am, you know, least apt, if you will. But at the same time, like I always manage to feel ahead of clients who, you know, have a lot of other stuff to think about too. Like they don't have the opportunity to sit and spend like who can spend 10,000 hours on Bitcoin, right? It's not a ton of people who can do that. So, and our clients can not do that. So that's, I guess,
But that's where the asset management play comes in, though, in that there are asset allocators out there that are looking for certain types of assets for different risk profiles for different customers that they have. And it's like, well, what's this Bitcoin thing? How do I even buy it? Who knows about it? Who can give me a glossy research report that I can actually send to my customer and say, look, these guys look like they know what they're talking about. My mate's already invested with them. They think they know what they're talking about. I reckon it's a good bet. You know, portfolio allocation of 1%, bang, in we go, or whatever the conversation might be. So, and this is a common theme. I talk about this a lot. The leveraging other people's research in order to make good investments is totally and utterly allowed. If anything, it's good. So unlike when you're in school and you're told you can't copy someone's work because then you're in trouble, actually, if you have someone that you trust and then respect and you know they've done the work, then putting your money alongside theirs, not a bad bet.
No, great artists steal, right?
Yeah, or everyone's influence comes from somewhere. And going back to your point about Satoshi and never envisaging the impact it might have on our energy grid, I agree. There's no way 12, 13 years ago, conceptually, that would have been part of the discussion, whoever
No
he
way.
or they were.
And it's not
What is
part of,
intriguing, though, is like, when someone invented the wheel, they didn't invent cars straight away, but like that was
right.
an important technology that's part of a car.
Mhm.
It's like humans, the ingenuity levels are just extraordinary. Like the ability to
Mhm.
sit down and learn stuff. Like basically everything you've told me today is, stuff I don't really understand. I'll admit that, but you've gone away and learnt about it. The fact is, you started at zero. The day we're born, we don't know anything. And then here we
Mhm.
are, however many years later, and we understand these different things that we've spent the time to go and learn about. So what Bitcoin becomes, who knows, and how is it part of the kind of tech stack that we use, and what will it be part of in the future that wouldn't have been possible without it? It's impossible to predict, but it's kind of like, designers take inspiration from all sorts of places, and the combination of that work is what ends up being the end product, I guess.
Yeah. And so when I was a teenager, my uncle, who's been like a great inspiration in my life, and like an enabler of all my kind of crazy ideas of like what I wanted to do, like education wise and all that. Like he's helped me like realize a lot of these plan, sort of loose plans that I had, and loose goals for knowledge. When I was a teenager, he sent me this anecdote about Steve Jobs when he was in college age, and how he went to college with his like stepdad's money, effectively. And he while he was at college, he like kind of went with what interested him. So he studied random stuff like computer science and calligraphy, and just things that you just would never think that you would be able to use in combination, right? And then he, after a while, was like, I don't know that I'm getting like a lot out of this, so he like dropped out. And then he ended up starting up Apple. And one of the things that he was able to do in building early operating systems that nobody else did was that he could add a ton of different fonts, because he had studied calligraphy randomly.
Yeah, I've read this. I've read his autobiography. It's a fascinating story. And he was
It,
very, very particular about it. He'd sit down and he'd be super, super strict on exactly what fonts were allowed and what shouldn't be used, etc. Yeah, point being, it was a skill set that an entrepreneur had that was unusual, and ended up being a real point of difference on their journey to success.
Absolutely. And without him taking that random calligraphy class, like Apple might have never become the
Correct.
preferred sort
Yep.
of publishing operating system.
For the creative platform.
Yeah, no, exactly. And these types of random, like I kind of feel like, so obviously, like I'm just like a regular guy, and he has like changed the world, but I kind of feel like a lot of those like same things have ended up like happening to me. Like I've just studied a bunch of things that I thought was like very interesting, and because of that, when you study something that you think is like actually interesting, you tend to retain them because you have an intrinsic motivation for getting that knowledge and holding on to it. And you do things with it within your own mental modeling of like how you perceive the world, right? And like a lot of these things have just like randomly happened to me. Like I studied, like I said, thermodynamics, networks. After I left my master's program, having graduated out of University of Barcelona, I started working in finance in London, just dealing with a lot of storytelling around like central banking. Hadn't even heard of Bitcoin. Then I did hear about Bitcoin, started getting interested in it, but then took a job in something completely unrelated. I started working in energy shipping. And so through energy shipping, I sat on the LNG desk, which is liquid natural gas. Are really familiar with electricity grids and the world's energy systems, right? Like all the networks that we use globally to get energy, electricity grids, gas pipelines, oil trade routes, oil pipelines, like all of this stuff I got introduced to. And that also, like in such a crazy roundabout way, enabled me to get like just like a, I don't know, like a natural understanding, like I guess kind of early, about the potential of proof of work and what it could do to our energy grids. And we started writing back in 2018 about how Bitcoin and proof of work could end up incentivizing the build outs of renewables, and how stranded renewables were the perfect kind of energy source for proof of work, and how Bitcoin miners could end up raising the profitability of these energy assets that otherwise didn't really have much clientele, and that in the end, if these assets became more profitable and they made money for their owners would then later have the ability to finance proper interconnection with these assets, and they would they would from there on become more sort of productive parts of our overall energy systems, and become more helpful for like retail and business markets, whereas right now they're kind of just sitting out in the middle of nowhere, and no one can really access them because there's no grid connection that goes there, and no one's going to finance that because that doesn't make any sense, and there's no money in the asset because it's not really like profitable. All of these things kind of just have come together in a very random way through like random experiences like throughout my life. So I kind of feel very fortunate that
it's awesome. I feel very similar in some ways. I'm actually a shipbroker, so I work in the dry bulk space. And
that's awesome.
I did 5 years, quit, went and worked in startups for 5 years, didn't work out, back working in the shipbroking space. And so I'm very similar in that sense of, when you sit down and you understand international shipping, the amount of stuff that we dig, we move, and we burn is crazy. Like beyond like mind-blowing volumes of stuff, whether it's liquefied natural gas, crude oil, coal, iron ore. It's just crazy. Point being is that the energy network's fascinating, and understanding, so I'm familiar with the coal market and looking at electricity power generation. And coal is still the predominant source of electricity globally, fact. And we ship 1.2 billion tons a year on the oceans, fact. And you just think, oh, okay, cool. Renewables do what? Like a very tiny fraction of that. And you hear the future capex of BP, 15 billion, of which 50 million or 50 billion or something. What was it? Oh, I'm going to absolutely butcher these stats. But basically, the big energy companies, they're putting a fraction of the amount of capex in the future into renewables and alternative assets versus the traditional systems. But what's particularly mind-blowing, though, is that you might own a coal mine, but how do you get it to sell to anyone? Well, you've got to build a railway line, you've got to have a port, and you've got to then ship it to most likely Asian factories in China, Japan, and Korea. Now, with Bitcoin, you can have a stranded energy asset, whether that's liquefied natural gas, whether that's coal, frankly, whether that's hydro, whether that's any energy source, and you can monetize it without having that physical route to market that was required before. And this is an absolute game changer in terms of how energy is used and consumed and commercialized. I love some of the future predictions that I've read about people making in the Bitcoin space of, new citadels in different parts of the world where previously you wouldn't have gone because there was no way of monetizing the local energy assets, and now you can. And this is, Satoshi didn't think about that. Like, no way, right? These are just ramifications of what this technology means. And I completely echo your sentiment of feeling very fortunate to have had a number of seemingly random experiences that, you know, I have on my Twitter, all roads lead to Bitcoin, which somehow, like, when you kind of realize this, you're like, oh, whoa, what is this thing? And here I am, you know, on a podcast talking to you about it. It's fascinating.
Right. And I actually find that this is pretty common in a lot of Bitcoiners, because, you know, however you want to look at it, like, we're still very early stage. And I guess we're kind of late early stage when it comes to the amount of people who maybe have some exposure, because like there are some stats that saying, you know, like 15 or 20% of, or whatever, of Americans have like exposure, all of that. Okay, that's one thing. It's probably still like less than 1% who has like put 100 hours, let alone 1,000 hours into trying to figure out like, what is this? I mean, it's one thing to like YOLO into Bitcoin on your Robinhood, but it's a whole different thing to like sit down and actually try to figure out what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still find that we're very early stage in terms of, you know, knowledge about this, right? Like people becoming like Bitcoiners, for lack of a better term, as like someone who could at least give like a coherent explanation of what this like technology is, and how the network is formed, and like how the protocol dictates it, and how the currency unit emerges from it, and how it's transferred, you know, all these things.
How it becomes a clock, as you touched on briefly earlier. I mean, it's
nobody knows that. Like
yeah.
that is, you know, nobody knows that. Like, you know, there's like a small handful of people in the world who like fully grasps that. You'll never see it mentioned in any like official document. Like now these days, you know, you have the Congress, and in the US, you have the European Parliament, you have all of these like official bodies who, you know, you have the fucking IMF and the BIS and the World Bank and all of these guys, you know, the St. Louis Fed. There's been a ton of very high bureaucratic level work done on, you know, trying to figure out like what this is, and they will all try to like explain what proof of work is, and 0 times have I ever seen anyone correctly actually identify proof of work as a time ordering mechanism. They all think it's about transaction validation, which is just completely incorrect. But it's such an entrenched misconception that people over and over and over again just like fall into this like wrong mental model of how to view this. And so, you know, because you know, let me plug like where I actually, you know, realized this is from a random blog post from this guy called Gregory Trubetskoy, who I have no idea who this guy is. The only thing I know about him is that he put out this random blog post in 2018, and I think Nick Carter sent it to me, and he was like, dude, you need to read this. And I read it, and, you know, just had my mind completely blown by it. And now, you know, and here's what's fascinating. In the white paper, Satoshi never uses the word blockchain, but what he does say a couple of times is time chain. And it's almost crazy that this has like slipped so many people's understanding of like what it is that proof of work actually does at the end of the day. When it's kind of like right there, right? It's like the blockchain is a distributed timestamping server that contains transaction information. And because we know the ordering of the blocks, the transactions that are in the blocks can then be used to construct the ownership database, the UTXO set, right? And like it's kind of wild that we're like 13 years in, almost. We're 12 and a half years in, and we're still at this level of like deep confusion and misunderstanding about one of the most fundamental aspects about this. Unless you're of the more cynical and conspiratorially oriented mindset, where you actually think that these people do understand, but don't want to acknowledge that that's the fact because it doesn't help them achieve their narrow political goals. So, you know,
I'm personally, I'm sorry to jump in, but that point's important. I think it's just naivety more often than not. People just haven't done the work and they don't understand it. Like how you're describing the Bitcoin tech stack right now. Like I've heard it described like that, but of the probably 20% of the research I've read would maybe talk about it like that, but 80% will skim over this fact and, you know, talk about something else basically. And that's in hundreds of hours of researching so far. To me, it's a good reminder as to what it is, what this actually is. But equally, to my mind, most people are just naive. They just haven't worked it out yet.
I agree, and I find that, you know, your explanations of Bitcoin kind of go through a phase where in the beginning they can be quite simple, but they're just wrong. And then you move into a phase where you struggle to explain it in a way that isn't extremely complicated, but it's a lot more correct. And then you sort of enter like a more Zen phase where you're just like, well, actually, I can explain this quite simply in a way that, you know, if you're interested, even like, you know, your grandma can understand, you know.
So Christopher, what I love about someone like yourself is you described at the start, a STEM student. So the maths, the science, the technology, the engineering, this is not a skill set that was natural to myself. I was more of a creative student, and latterly became interested in business and went and had a business career. But the fact is, it's a hole in my due diligence skill set of a new thing. And to listen to yourself with a brilliant scientific background, come look at Bitcoin, analyze it, think this is actually incredibly innovative and very exciting. I'm going to jump in and get involved and make a life out of it. It's an excellent signal for me to also utilize as well. And I think there'll be a lot of people out there that obviously don't have the scientific skill set that you do, that will also find these kind of conversations very valuable, because they go, oh, okay, well, if he thinks that, then I think it's fair enough for me to kind of jump in alongside. Listen, we're coming up to an hour and a half of chatting, so I want to try and wrap it up now, because I'm aware of time. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. What does the future have in store as a final question? And after that, where can we get in touch?
What, for me?
Yeah.
Or...
yeah. So what's the future got in store? Just like, you know, how do you see things playing out the next few months/years? You mentioned you've got more focused on Bitcoin research only. And then we'll just wrap it up with, you know, how people can get in touch with you if needs be. Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea how my life's going to turn out, and I never did. And now at least I'm just, you know, come to terms with that. So I don't even pretend to think that I know what's going to happen to myself. So with that in mind, like, do I have any idea what's going to happen to Bitcoin? Probably not. I feel like we're in an interesting place now. We're like almost in this like weird pseudo bear market, but it doesn't feel like a bear market because you know, I don't know. Things are kind of like lulling a little bit, but I think as always, there's like a ton of really interesting stuff that's happening in the background. I think last year kicked in a bunch of doors that were very important. The fact that we had sovereign countries like literally go out and adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, I think forced this subject as a matter of debate in a lot of other places. And I think those debates are happening right now. we had some very large institutional players come in last year and take big positions. I think, and obviously we observe this as, you know, our institutional clients is like our bread and butter at CoinShares, and we know that these discussions are now happening at a much more advanced level than before. So I think what's happening right now is there's a ton of stuff happening in the background where certain buckets of investment money are going through the steps that they need to go through in order to be able to take positions in new asset classes at all, because a lot of them are very tight mandates and they might not be allowed, like they might not have the paperwork in order internally to be able to like do anything and get involved. I think a lot of that is now happening in the background. You know, we're observing more and more advanced discussions on a part of like large asset managers, you know, inching closer to just realizing that this is another type of asset that they just need to have exposure to. And, you know, the conversation has moved so far away from, is this going to exist in 6 months, 18 months, you know, 3 years? Everybody understands that it's got staying power now and it's not going anywhere. All of those things have kind of now caused a lot of big decision makers to retreat and make sure that they have everything in order internally before they, you know, go out and do something. I think a lot of people are waiting on the fence for other people in the space. A lot of these like large investment managers don't like getting, you know, quote unquote balls deep into something unless their colleagues are as well, because they have a career risk. Now it's going to come to a point where the career risk is going to flip the entirely opposite way, where not being in Bitcoin is going to risk your career if everybody else is and you're left behind, right? And I think that kind of singularity moment is like creeping closer. In Bitcoin itself, I think, you know, it's kind of like bear markets are nice because it's like build mode, where technology is just developed, new stuff is added to the tech stack, new capabilities are being announced. Taro coming out on Lightning was a big thing. Looks like we're going to have a bit of like an internal battle over this new CTV proposal. I think that's very healthy. This is kind of like we need little like civil war skirmishes from time to time to get everybody's like blood flowing again and get everyone switched on and notice what's going on. It's good that we have these debates about, you know, how, like, what is the governance of Bitcoin? Like, how do we determine what code makes it into core? Is it cool for people to release their own clients like Jeremy Rubin now has done? If not, why not? Like, this is permissionless, like he can do whatever he wants. You know, it's good. It feels nice. It feels less like, you know, whenever the crazy bull markets are happening, there's always so much going on that, you know, it can be hard to keep up or just feel that you're on top of what's going on. Whereas these periods are nice for like people who, you know, who study this like intently. We can like build things, we can concentrate on like fundamentals research, we can like develop our models, we can keep doing kind of the things that we're doing. We're not constantly like thrown between like, oh my god, what's going on? Is the price going up? Is the price going down? Like, we can kind of concentrate on what I think is what our investors really should be paying attention to, which isn't so much, is now a good time to buy? Obviously they are going to be interested in that because that's their incentive structure. But if they had a little lower time preference, it's almost becoming a little cliche at this point, but if their time preference was a little lower, I think they would realize that what's more important right now isn't to go should we buy now or should we buy later? It's just like figure out what it is that this is. Like get a full grasp, or as full of a grasp as you can, about
know that you
how
want to buy it and why.
yeah, like just start with what is this? Like how does it work? And once you figure out like how it works, you can start figuring out, okay, now that I know how this works, what do I think the implications of this is going to be on the real world? Once you have those implications, you can then fit that into your macro understanding that you already have if you're, you know, these people. And once you fit that into your overall macro understanding, whether or not you should or should not buy Bitcoin will become completely obvious to you. Because either it's going to be, I don't think this is going to have any effect at all, this is bullshit, and you shouldn't buy. Or it's going to be, oh, actually, I think this is going to be a very profound change that's going to like drastically alter a lot about how we do things as a species. And I better have some exposure. And then the question is, should I buy now or should I buy later? It's kind of irrelevant. It's like, how many Bitcoins can I get my hands on? That's the question, right? No, seriously, that is the only question.
Yeah.
It's like, should I buy now or should I buy later? I buy some now and then buy some later. Like, you know.
It's that funny thing where when the price drops, the mainstream media will be like, Bitcoin's dead. And Bitcoiners that really get it are like, fucking happy days. This is actually a price I never expected to get. I'm buying more. And price action and value are two very, very different things. Well, Christopher, listen, I don't want to cut you off completely, but it's been a wonderful conversation that I feel like could go on for like another couple of hours, frankly. There's a few areas that you touched on that I didn't even get to ask questions on. But the picture you paint is very exciting. And you know, if I could summarize the institutional investors out there that currently have very little exposure to Bitcoin, that are currently going through the process of learning out why they want to buy it, I'm sure that someone like yourself is critical in that process for them. So good work, keep it up. Please bring them on board. And you know, we're really not a long way away from the next halvening process. The sell side pressure on this market is going to, you know, become even tighter, so to speak. And you know, bigger money's coming in at the same time. So you know, it's the kind of thing that we're all looking at as retail investors. It's like we can actually front run these people for the first time ever. Whoa.
Yep.
This is an unbelievable opportunity for the average bloke on the street to get involved.
The asymmetry is
insane. So on that note, so Chris, where can people get hold of you if they want to get in touch, please?
You can just find me on Twitter, probably. That's the best way. So I'm just C_Bendikson.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers. Take care.
All right, you too.